Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon on the topic of returning to work. Obviously, this is going to be an interesting session this afternoon, so we've got a lot to pack into it. So I'm just going to start off initially with a few kind of housekeeping notes, and then I'll introduce kind of the topic to you, and then I'll move on to introduce our fantastic panel that we've got for you today as well. So just to start off with, for those of you that are familiar with our webinars, you'll know that we always say the best experience is usually by using Google Chrome. And if you do have any audio or visual issues, then if you press refresh, that should resolve those for you. We also have to let you know that we record these sessions. We always find it's useful to record them because there are often colleagues that can't attend and want to watch them back later on. We post them onto our YouTube channel. And also, if you want to share them, the sessions with colleagues, it's something that you can revisit as well. So just be mindful that it is being recorded. We really want to encourage you to use the chat function. In lieu of physical events, these are very much our opportunity to network. So if you can introduce yourselves via the chat function, talk to each other, connect with each other, that would be fantastic. And also, if you have any questions, please could you bob them into the questions tab. And then what we'll do is once we've kind of done the formal presentations and discussion part of the session, we'll try and pick up as many questions as we can do and run through those. So hopefully the housekeeping bits are all clear for everybody. And it's great to see that already people are introducing themselves. So just by introduction for this session, as we've said, it is about returning to the workplace. So we'll be looking at how employers are taking this step to return to work. Obviously, things are opening up much more now. And we're going to look at how employers can begin to manage the conversation with employees and to build that trust as well. You know, mindful that there's lots of anxiety out there from people, both employers and employees. And we know that through the pandemic, people have been kind of forced to work in a different way. Lots of employers have trialled home working for the first time. And although benefits have been found, you know, there are still issues with that. But one of the topics that has come up time and time again is this model of hybrid working, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. So obviously, you know, that conversation about returning to work has become ever more important. And we're conscious that, you know, both from an employer and an employee perspective, these conversations are going to be quite sensitive and need to be dealt with in that way. So we feel this important webinar will help anybody that's wanting to look at how to return to the workplace safely. But also we're hoping you'll get something from it to help you to have some of those good conversations between you as employers and your employees. So we're absolutely delighted today that we've got a really good panel with us. So for the introductions, can I introduce you to Professor Sir Cary Cooper, who many of you will have heard of. You might well have read some of his books as well. So we're really pleased that Cary's with us today. And we're also delighted that Katie Miller's able to join us, Senior Advisor on Policy from the Confederation of British Industry. So it's brilliant that Katie's here with some of her insights into some of the work that they've done there. And we always like to have an employer voice. So it's great that we've got Carl Hampson with us here today. And Carl is the General Manager of Allied Bakeries. So very much a household name. And lots of experience and you know, complexity in their workforce that they can bring to the table. So without further ado, I'm going to first of all move over to Katie. And just Katie, just as a starter really, we know you've done quite a lot of research and you've been looking at obviously the return to the workplace for some time. And this term, hybrid working, is being used kind of more and more now. And just wondered, can you give us kind of some brief overview, key points that have come out of your research that kind of might help us to put that into context?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, thank you for having me here today. And we know that this is obviously a topic that lots of businesses in our membership and beyond have been speaking about over the last few months. And obviously the context of this, as you say, is that most people have been working from home or working flexibly in some way for the past year due to the pandemic. And I think during the first wave, there was nearly about half of those in employment who were actually working from home. And while there have definitely been some challenges, I think with doing so that we've all identified, lots of businesses are increasingly pointing to issues such as loss of the social aspect of the office, difficulty collaborating or working creatively in the office, from training to junior staff members as well. So we know that there have been a lot of benefits too, and a lot of people are thinking about what are the new expectations around work in the workplace as we go forward now. We now know that lots of jobs can be done flexibly or at home, and there's lots of people have liked working in this way as well, whether people feel like they could spend more time with their families or just value the lack of commute in the morning and evening. And that's something, whenever I say this, I can always relate to. Getting the tube in London, as some people might know, is an absolute nightmare. So something that I definitely in the future am looking forward to not doing 5 days a week. But what we've been hearing from a lot of members is that both businesses and their employees are quite keen to retain these benefits and learning going forward. And from research that we were conducting before Christmas last year ahead of our annual conference, we found that 75% of businesses were expecting flexible working to become more common in their organisation, and around 47% are expecting most of their workforce to adopt a hybrid model beyond 2021, hoping kind of we're past the bad stages of the pandemic. And I think what we're really hearing too from a lot of businesses is that there's a lot of kind of competitive opportunities here that they want to take advantage of, with some pointing to the opportunity for hybrid working to help productivity in their workforce, engagement with their staff, as well as opportunities to improve D&I and kind of attracting and retaining staff from a wider geographical pool. But I think one of the main benefits that we're really hearing and that a lot of our members are increasingly pointing to is that it tries to create the best of both worlds. So it's combining the benefits of working from home while acknowledging kind of the vital role that the office can play for things like collaboration and training, just kind of, the training for junior staff, the social aspect, why people like to come into the office, and try and hold on to both of that. And I think really what we're hearing from people is, well, what does that actually look like in practice? What does hybrid working look like? It's a new term to most of us. How do we do that? And I think what we've really been talking to our members about is that it's up for interpretation, and it's going to be unique to every business and their workforce, whether that means, designating certain days for teams to come together in the office as a business, or giving the employees genuine flexibility to decide whenever they work. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this, and every business is different, and they're all going to have the conversations with their staff and come to what works for them and what works best for them as an organisation. And I think when trying to figure out that right balance, it really requires businesses to think about some of these really big practical questions, starting with, why do we use the office? How do we use the office? How do we want to use it in the future? And how much flexibility can we offer to employees that they're happy with, but that also maintains and kind of boosts productivity, performance, training, things like that. So the research we did to try and help was really around what are kind of the key areas that businesses need to think about and consult with their staff about to make hybrid working work. So we spoke to a number of businesses about kind of what their potential plans were for the future and what those kind of key sticking areas were. And we identified a framework that had 4 areas really to think about. The first was around health and well-being. So how do we think differently about mental health and well-being when we're working in a hybrid way? So we've obviously thought about mental health and well-being a lot during the last year. When people have been working remotely full-time during a pandemic, it's obviously had a terrible impact on mental health for a lot of people. But how does this differ when some people are in the office and others are working from home, when managers can see some of their team members in the office potentially, but not others? And what do businesses need to think about to make sure communications channels are open to talk about mental health and well-being, regardless of where someone is working? So from businesses we've been speaking to so far, a lot of them are thinking about how they can adapt some of the good strategies they put in place during the pandemic. So things like encouraging flexible working around core working hours, limiting meeting times. We all know the term about kind of Zoom fatigue, things like that. How we can still think about these things in a hybrid environment. Encouraging people to take walks during the day. It's some of these simple things that actually during the pandemic have made the most difference, that we're really encouraging businesses to keep thinking about in the future and keep implementing these in a hybrid environment too. The next kind of stage of the framework is thinking about kind of recruitment, development, onboarding, training, these kind of aspects. And onboarding and training in particular is one of the key areas that a lot of our members has been telling us has been difficult during the pandemic. And this is usually split between kind of more senior colleagues in the office. Usually junior employees often learn by osmosis from more senior colleagues in the office. They're not having that. Kind of more junior colleagues are at home trying to kind of learn potentially in a new job when they don't have the people around them to kind of learn from. But as well around kind of onboarding new staff members as well, who might find it harder to bond with the team if they're new and feel part of the organisation as a whole. So I think in a hybrid world where not everyone is necessarily in the office on the same days, it's really thinking about what strategies do businesses need to put in place to make sure more junior staff member can be around and learn from more senior colleagues, or how do you alter your hybrid model for new starters when they're coming into the team? And for example, one of the case studies actually in our guide that we talk about is about a company who is giving the power to managers really to designate certain days for the whole team to come into the office together when new starters are joining the team, rather than their normal approach, which is going to be letting individuals choose when they want to come into the office and work in the office. So there's almost a bit of a question that I think businesses need to think about here around control and flexibility. So how do you have to change the balance of flexibility that you're offering to employees in certain events, such as when new starters join the business, or where you think it might be beneficial for junior employees to be physically around senior staff for the benefit of their development? And the next stage kind of linked to that is all about kind of leadership, management and engagement. And I'm sure most managers here would tell you that their management style has had to change in one way or another while working remotely over the last year. Managing and leading hybrid teams is very different to leading teams entirely based at home or entirely based in the office. And one of the examples that actually a lot of businesses keep mentioning to us of being an issue potentially in a hybrid environment is around how do you create inclusive meetings for your team where everyone feels like they can contribute in a kind of fair environment. And the example they point to is kind of in a meeting room, you have some people at home dialing into a meeting, some people in the office in person. Is it the same experience for everyone? Is it fair? Is it inclusive? And what training and tools do managers need to lead meetings like that? But a general question of what training do we need to provide for our managers to make sure that they can adapt to the hybrid environment? And another part of this, I think, that Carol mentioned at the beginning, is how should leaders and managers recontract with their team to decide how much flexibility is the right amount? How do you have those conversations? How do you decide how many days in the office is going to be enough? And do you designate certain days where everyone is in the office together? Or do you come to that solution in a collective way somehow? And from businesses we've spoken to, many are looking at putting together kind of mandatory training or guidance for managers to help them run through those conversations with their team to decide what works best for them. And a lot of challenges I think are coming up around an us and them, kind of them and us challenge in their organisation, thinking about those who don't have the opportunity to work from home because of their job role, or can sometimes, but not as often as some other people in the organisation. How do you make sure that the flexibility that you're potentially offering to employees is as fair as it can be across the board? I mean, there's always been a them versus us problem in a lot of organizations, but how do you make sure that's not exacerbated when you are adopting this hybrid workforce and this hybrid environment? And the last part really is a lot about operations and practical support. And this is really split into thinking about how do you make sure everyone has the right equipment to work in two different places. If they're working from home, ensuring the right health and safety checks have been completed. Everyone has kind of the right desk, the right chair, has a good kind of setup for them to work there. But it's also thinking about the future of the office too, which is a really popular topic at the moment. What does that look like to accommodate a hybrid workforce, whether that's kind of moving towards hot desking for the first time, thinking about increasing the amount of collaboration space in the office, or putting in more meeting rooms because that's why you think that people might want to come into the office is to meet their colleagues and have those kind of informal meetings. And I think with a lot of this, really, it's going to be very experimental, and that's what we keep hearing from our members, is that they're going to try something, they're going to put a policy in place, but they really need to see how it goes and how it works for the workforce. Because at the moment, it's obviously quite hypothetical. a lot of people aren't back to the office yet. So knowing how it's going to work when people genuinely have the choice to decide where they want to work is going to take some time to get used to, and a lot of trial and error along the way. So yeah, that's it for me, and just what we've been hearing from our membership.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Katie. And lots to think about there. And I'm sure that what you've said there as well will really, really resonate with lots of people in our audience today. Cary, just picking up on a couple of those points that have been raised by Katie, things like, employers looking at bespoke models, to suit their workforce and their environment, etc. But also picking up on things like the leadership and the changing and evolving role of leaders in all of this as well, and obviously integrating that with the health and well-being. Is there any advice that you could give to our audience in terms of how some of those conversations can go, and what might help some of those conversations to evolve in a positive way?
Yeah, I think Katie has kind of outlined the issues that we're going to have. And the positives of it. A lot of people, as Katie said, the vast majority of people I've talked to, where you can, they want to work flexibly. But by the way, pre-COVID, they wanted to. I did a book where I went to all the leading academics in the world, a book called Flexible Work, which, fortunate for me, came out in May of 2020, and it's a bestseller now. But it's an academic book, and it's not saying how you should do it. I asked all these people in North America, China, India, Europe, what's the evidence in your region? And the evidence was overwhelming that if you could, if you're a doctor, a nurse, a bus driver, a pilot, a paste assembly line worker, you can't do it. Carl's employees, they make bread, so they can't do that from home. So, but yeah, there it is. He's selling his product already. But those who can have always wanted it. Okay, now the issues for me are that we have two corporate examples of how you should do it and how you shouldn't do it. One is Goldman Sachs. So the chief executive of Goldman Sachs 4 or 5 weeks ago said, nobody can work from home. You have to all come in. Well, first of all, my students have reacted very negatively. If they think they're going to get any MBA students in the UK or from anywhere, they won't, because that's not what they want. That's one. So that's one far end. There are still employers that say you have to be at the coalface, even if they're in a sector where people could work more flexibly. That's bad news. The PwC did the best thing, in my view. What they did is the HR person there said, here's what we're going to do, which is what HR should have done pre-COVID anyway, which is to say, with each individual, we're going to look at their role and have a discussion with each of them on how would they like to work. So if they're younger people and they want to work exclusively from the work environment, that is fine with us, right? We'll make the space and make sure it works. But as Katie said, the workplace itself is going to be different and much more hot desking, I suspect, in the future as companies downsize their space. Sorry about that. That's just my daughter calling me. Anyway, so that's one kind of really, I think, important issue, which is you negotiate with each employee. You talk to them. HR, this is not big business. I'm the president of CIPD. I just came off the board meeting. That's what we've been talking about. That's good practice. You talk to each of them, and it's a psychological contract. Somebody may say, I'd like to do X, but X doesn't fit their role. So they have to give in, and there has to be, as Katie was saying herself, there has to be flexibility between employer and employee in terms of the psychological contract. The big issue for me is none of this. The big issue for me is, do we have the right kind of managerial workforce to manage people? Some of them are going to work from home. Some of them are going to come in the office. Some of them are going to work from some coffee shop, who knows where. And how are we going to recognize, how are we going to team build in that context? How are we going to recognize when people aren't coping, they have unmanageable workloads, particularly going into a recession, which will be big time. It'll make 2008 look like a peanut factory, because when the furloughing stops, when government support for companies stops, and when they have to be competitive, they're going to have to look at their labor costs. And we know we're going to lose people. And that's just it. And it's going to be big time. So that's really insecure. That tends to lead to people showing presenteeism, which causes ill health. That is turning up to work ill, working all hours, sending emails over the weekend, doing anything to show commitment to the organization, right? So how does this line manager manage those people? How do they recognize? So my own view is something very unusual, I think, should happen. I think HR should be looking at every single manager from shop floor to top floor. They know where the bodies lie. They know the good ones, they know the bad ones, and they know the ones that need training. And as Katie did talk about training being really important, I call it the 50-30-20 factor. 30% have it naturally, have good people skills, EQ, emotional intelligence. 50%, and by the way, they're all technically competent. 50% maybe need the training. They definitely need the training, because how are they going to manage people in this context? And they will need to enhance their social skills, social people skills, recognize when people aren't coping, go one-to-ones with people, nothing to do with the work, but if they're working from home, just keeping in touch with them and everything else. Now, here's the big issue. We have about 20% of people who get promoted on the basis of their technical skills, but are untrainable. So we have an issue. And the issue is we finally have to look at our human resource. We talk about the most valuable resource we have is our human resource. We hear that frequently from senior people. So my own view, if we all did an audit of our managerial pool, as well as doing all the things Katie talked about, she's absolutely right. But the line manager is fundamental to whether this is going to work or not. And we just do not have enough people. There's only probably about 30%. I'm doing a rough here. About 30% who have both great technical and people skills. And in the future, what we have to do is promote people and recruit people where there's parity between their people skills and their technical skills. If we don't do that, by the way, that's been the problem of productivity in the UK, by the way, for ages. Us in business schools have even known that. And we're partly responsible because we don't train people in terms of social interpersonal skills, which we should do. We do knowledge base to them in business schools, but what we don't do is develop their people skills. And that's something we're going to have to do in the future. So that's just my take on it. And I want to give Carl a chance to come in.
I think that's fascinating as well, Cary, because I think you're right. There is going to be a massive requirement to shift what has been kind of embedded behaviours for such a long time, and changing that concept of being technically competent to being kind of more kind of people skills being a higher priority in many instances. So it's going to be a big cultural shift in lots of organisations as well, isn't it? So yeah, lots of challenges that you can see going forward, but a real opportunity at the same time as well to learn from what's happened during the pandemic and pull on that best practice and make it become the norm going forward. But obviously it's going to take some time, isn't it? And some real mind shift changes as well that have been embedded for such a long time. So if I come to you then, Carl, I mean, for you, I mean, you've got, a large number of employees. It's quite complex in that you will have people that perhaps through the pandemic have been able to work remotely, but you will also have had others that haven't been able to do that. And obviously in your moves forward, I'm sure that there's been some aspects of kind of conflict in the way that you might be approaching that return to work. So I'm just kind of curious to hear kind of what your thoughts are in terms of responses to what Cary and Katie have said, but also any reflections that you've had over the past 12 months and thoughts for going forward.
Yeah, I think the points that both Cary and Katie made are really interesting and very relevant. And I think if I pick up on the mental health one first and foremost, as a business, we've gone through some resizing of our operation, and being able to see that in advance, I think is quite relevant. And the reason I mention that is, as Cary mentioned, the economic outlook is going to be challenging. And one of the decisions we made locally was around how we prepare our team for sort of those mental health challenges. So we actually rolled out a program of, we did quite a bit of research, and we've now trained up roughly 30 managers as IACT managers. and that is around sort of like a mental health first aid. But rather than waiting for something to happen, it's about having people who can actually see the signs in advance. And I think that really does come onto this leadership issue. Because one of the challenges in any business, you have some people who are good at managing things, and some people, as Cary would say, 30%, who are good at leading people. And I think what we've found over the last 12 months is that hybrid approach, Carol, in terms of we're a bakery, and quite a lot of our workforce have been coming in, and that's been quite a safe, protected bubble, because for some people, nothing's changed. But then some of the roles have found it quite difficult, and I think some of the team felt they had to justify what they was doing when working from home. And I think sort of this issue of sending emails out late or not having breaks, and I think the challenge for all of us is understanding how we can work through that process so that people start to regain some of the boundaries between home and work. And I think from a health and well-being perspective, that is quite key. And lots of us have people shielding, and obviously the current small spikes we're seeing across the country in COVID in certain hotspots, there are lots of anxious people. So for me, that mental well-being training is quite key. And again, if you use your networks, one of the things we embraced with my team, we went through a program called DRAW, which was workplace resilience and well-being. And again, what we was trying to do is equip our leaders with skills to be able to look after themselves and look at their energy levels and the resilience of what they bring into the workforce. So if you can look after yourself, my view then is you're then in a position to be able to look after others. And I think that is really important, and sort of tools and techniques, because I think we've all found with Zoom and Teams and now Livestorm, which has been an amazing sort of experience for me. These relationships are quite transactional, because you lose that interpersonal skills around, because suddenly everything is around, let's crack on with the task at hand, and you lose that social interaction. And as we've been introducing people back into the business, certainly because we're a national business, so we have regional businesses and a central team. So I've got a couple of central people on site today, which is really good, because all they want to do is talk and actually sort of come into the office and whilst it's a bit funny, sort of sat in meetings and not being able to see what people are saying, it's just that social interaction is quite key for me. And one of the things that people might want to consider is we actually pulled a video together. So we've got plastic screens, sort of there's a rattling noise, and our workplace has changed quite significantly with one-way systems. And so we actually filmed like an onboarding video, which we did ourselves, to say, this is what's changed, and we sent it out to all the people who were shielding, just to say, it's still the same Allied Bakeries, what makes great bread. But actually, some things have changed, but there's some things are familiar. And I think it is that recognition that some people are still anxious. And I think having the flexibility, as what was touched on earlier, around sort of that quality conversation at an individual level, which doesn't actually give carte blanche to say, come and do whatever you want. It's still about meeting the business needs, but just trying to be a little bit more flexible. And so some of my team work different days of the week. Office space at the moment, we restrict the number of people in offices, which might still continue. And it's accepting and understanding. And I think because we've done the IACT and we've done the RAW, and we also did quite a bit of work on insights as well. So that's sort of the team working profiling. And again, another good tool for setting rules and how you work together. But by looking at that, it allows good leaders to be able to signpost and see in advance potential areas where you just need to say, do you know what, it will take some people longer than others, and others it's just like nothing's changed, while some others are, you know, and it's just how you manage those conversations, I think. You know, and it does come back to the difference between leading people and managing things. And it's about sort of that practical application of a hybrid approach. And picking up on Katie's point, you know, just being clear, one size doesn't fit all. What might work for some people doesn't work for others. What might work for Allied Bakeries probably might not do for Rollinson's Knitwear. It's that sort of, you know, but let's see where we can pinch and use our networking, because there might be some fantastic ideas in each one of our businesses where we can cherry pick and think, wow, that's, you know, let's set a standard and example for the rest of the sort of, you know, set some great standards in the Northwest that other regions think, oh, what are they doing?
That's brilliant, Carl. And it's obvious that you obviously have good relationships within your organisation, and you are including the whole workforce in those conversations. And you're right, you know, this network is about people sharing ideas and kind of working together. That's really good. And picking up on kind of your point as well, Carl, about the fact you are including people, but kind of picking up on a point that Sharon's made in the chats as well. I was just going to ask you, Cary, one of the things that Sharon's talked about is about, you know, you've talked about the role of the managers, etc., but making sure that this approach isn't just top down, and about encouraging managers to include and feel confident to include others in those discussions about the ways forward. And also Leslie's commented about the fact that some managers will have different levels of confidence and want to do things in different ways. So are there any good or useful skills that an employer should try to utilize to have them conversations and include everybody?
Well, it's all, Carol, for me, about employee voice. You want to find out from your employees, you know, what works for them, but it is a psychological contract between your boss and you, your employer and you, given the nature of the role you have. And that's why I like the PwC model, because what you're doing is your line manager or HR, with the help of HR, helps to negotiate that, and you figure it out what works. So you might be, so for some people, they'll say, I'm young, I have a flat in Manchester, in the middle of Manchester, I just, you know, I can't work from there. I've been doing it and it's been driving me crazy. Also, I'm just a couple years out of college. I need to be with other people my own age. I need to learn from some older heads. I need that, okay? And that's what you do with that person. And then some other person says, well, I live up, you know, I live in Poynton. It's an hour and a quarter to get in, an hour and a half to get back. I'm a lot of, you know, I want to pick my kids up from school. You know, I want good work-life balance. And what I want is I'll come in when it's important. I come in to team build, to socialize, to whatever, develop a new product, a new service. And that's the way it should go. The problem we have, I think, is, do we have enough people who know how to do that conversation and engage them rather than impose it? Because my worry is there are quite a few people out there in managerial roles who will just say, well, we're going to use this model. You know, we expect you to work 2 days in, 3 days out. That might not fit anybody. They may want to be 5 days in. Somebody else maybe want to do 2 days in. Do not assume you know what they're thinking and what they need. Ask them, listen to them. So there's a training need there about how you do that, particularly as you develop people's social interpersonal skills. We need that more than ever before. We needed it pre-COVID. This has only accelerated what was needed and demanded, in a sense, by employees. The problem we had is employees were frightened to death of taking flexible working. I did a big, huge study funded by the lottery fund, would you believe, working with working families. We looked at one big global company, headquartered in London, but global. And then we looked at one big government department. We were trying to find out why men didn't take flexible working, where women did. And they said, the reason I'm not taking it is because it'll show lack of commitment and I won't get promotion if I say I want to work partly from home, partly from central office. Women said, I'll have to take it because I have the main caring responsibility, but I think it will adversely affect my career too. So we had that problem pre-COVID. Now we have an opportunity to solve it and sort it.
Yeah. We've had a few questions coming in from our audience as well. So I'm going to ask a question that's to all of you, first of all, just to see what you think about this one. Just to see, do the panel agree that today's leaders need a high EQ? And will this therefore mean a higher proportion of female leaders? Obviously, there's a tendency that, I guess, females might broach some of those subjects more. I don't know, but yeah, that's just a question that we've had. So, Katie, what's your thoughts on that, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates to Cary's points before, I think, all about kind of training and listening to staff as well. And I think this relates to a wider point too about diversity of thought, diversity in the office. And something that we're hearing quite a bit coming through as a concern from some of our members is about who's more likely to want to go back into the office more often. And what they're hearing is that's more likely to be men than it is women. So it's going back to your problem before, that more women are probably more likely to take up flexible working. And quite a few people are worried that this is going to be exacerbated in the hybrid world too, and the effects that might have. For instance, we had one business telling us recently they will prioritize kind of junior staff coming into the office to make sure they are learning what I was talking about, or they are learning from senior colleagues. But they have a concern that the people that are going to be in the office are mainly going to be men. And how does that impact on kind of diversity of thought, diversity of practice, the kind of working world that you're exposed to? So I think there is going to be something here that kind of both leaders need to be aware of, and managers, to make sure that we aren't stepping backwards in any way, and we are moving forward in a way that is still inclusive and diverse. And yes, definitely kind of emotional intelligence. We really need to be thinking about that leadership training and that management training. So cannot echo Cary's points enough that he was previously saying.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, I've got another question. I'm going to move on with the questions because we've got a few coming in now. This is a question for Carl. So Carl, related to Katie's point about the us and them between office and operational teams, what have you done to ensure that your operational teams don't feel resentful towards the office-based teams who are obviously able to have much more flexibility with hybrid working, and that approach going forward?
I think probably in the early days that was a real challenge for us, and it was quite interesting because I'd sit on Teams calls and the people who was in with operations would be saying, they're asking us to do this, but we're coming in really early and finishing really late, and now we've got to put this one-way system in. And then the people who are working from home said, I didn't like that sarcastic comment that was said, and I'd be thinking, oh my goodness, how do we solve this? And I'd like to say I have, but if I'm being honest, I probably haven't. But one of the things we did do is take a step back. So I mentioned insights profiling earlier, and insights, which is like a way of getting the best out of different people's preferences. And we revisited that. So we did once a month, we have an insight day. With initially my team and direct reports, but then with their teams, and that was really about re-establishing some of the boundaries. And we talk about, we called it the jar of marbles, and it was like, have you put a marble in the jar, or have you taken one out when you say something sarcastic? And therefore, it is probably going back to just understanding some basic rules, because you do miss out on that interaction and that sort of camaraderie. And I'm a great believer is, I'm not bothered if people come from Mars or Venus. If they're good leaders, they're good leaders, and that's the challenge. And having the right people. So what we did, it was really about going back to basics and calling out behaviours, and getting people used to sort of etiquette on Teams, because some people would sit there and go, and it has been, it's been a real roller coaster, but it's also, as Katie and Cary said, it's that real opportunity and vehicle for change. Because flexible working, I mean, I'm in the office today, I'm suited, I'm booted, I'm probably one of the best bakers you've ever seen. But yesterday I was working from home in my shorts and my t-shirt, and the day before, and that's been a step change for me too. So we talk about shadow of the leader, and I used to get loads saying, why are you in all those hours? And therefore I've got to make sure I cast the right shadow to encourage others to do that. And it's a learning for me, and 50% of the things I get right, and 50% of the things I can do better, you know, and it's acknowledging that. But this is a real opportunity and vehicle for change, without a doubt.
Yeah. I like that idea about the shadow, and I also like the idea about the jar as well with the marbles. It will go alongside the one where people keep themselves on mute when they shouldn't be, and you have to put a coin in there. So I've got another couple of questions, so I'm going to kind of get through them. So another one directed to you, Cary, is how can we convince and encourage organisations like the Goldman Sachs to consider working hybrid? How do you move those that are kind of resistant to some of those changes?
Well, guess what? The market will determine that in the end, because they won't be able to recruit top people, because the millennials and the Z generation don't want what they're saying they're going to get. And even though they'll go to that, or you'll say, well, they'll go to that organization because they'll put it on their CV. They even won't do that because they want, you know, Katie's generation, I call it, you're the kind of millennial generation, let's say, right? Katie's generation, they call them the snowflakes. Why do they call them the snowflakes? They call them the snowflakes because they won't put up with what their parents put up with, i.e. the crap organization, a lousy organization to work for. So the older generations, you know, their parents, you, Carl, in particular, but you know what I mean. The generations that, you know, Katie's parents and everything else would be in a job and they'd say, well, I have to pay mortgage, I have to do this, so I'll put up with this. The younger generation, I talk to my students, I say, they'll come back, they did an MBA, they were 27 when they did the MBA, they come back, they're 32. I say, you still working for someone? Oh no, I've worked 2 employers since then. I said, well, that doesn't show very much commitment. He said, listen, Cary, lousy work environment. They don't care about me, they spit me out. You know, they just, I'm a disposable asset. So I went to the next one. And they're experimenting with where they want to work. I want to work hard, but I want to be valued. I want to be trusted. I want to work, if I want to work flexibly, they're going to allow me to. They're going to give me my head. They're going to push me. I don't mind that, right? And that's what that generation wants. And we're going to lose them. So the companies that do that, they're gone. They'll be history. Within 5 years. So yeah, they'll be around. There'll always be people who go for the bucks or for the CV, but there'll be high labor turnover, and it's very costly to a business. So in the end, you don't have to sell it to them. Good work. CIPD's strapline is good work. That's it. That's what the next generation want, and it's our responsibility to create it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of, it all leads back to having that good culture, that being open, expectations and you know, values and behaviours are going to change so much over the next few years, aren't they? And it's going to be very, very interesting to see it. I've just got one final question that I'm going to ask on behalf of one of our audience members. We've kind of touched on it already, but just about how you can go about and ensure you're being inclusive for all staff managers when you're trying to plan and move towards a new way of working, particularly hybrid working. So, Katie, any comments on that?
I think it's kind of a lot of what we've touched on before. It's the open, honest kind of conversations with staff, making sure you are kind of consulting and understanding what staff members want, what managers want, what everyone needs as well. And this goes kind of beyond, I mean, training is a huge part, but it's also things like, I think someone mentioned in the chat, things around kind of reasonable adjustments, making sure that these are being taken into account. We had a conversation internally actually about our own future hybrid working policy at the CBI, and we'll probably be moving to hot desking. And we were thinking about things like, okay, so for the people that maybe have certain adjustments at their desk, for instance, already, whether that's because they need a quieter environment or certain support from their chair, how do we make sure that's kind of adapted into your hot desking environment, which lots of organizations are already doing, but it's just kind of things to think through and make sure every level of what is new and what you're thinking about does include everyone. You've spoken to everyone about what they need.
Yeah. And Carrie, would you agree as well that, you know, in that inclusive approach, the managers don't always have the answers, do they? You know, they're still learning as we're going along as well. So
absolutely. But you know what I think? I think if you look at somebody like Carl in his context, you have more of a potential problem than you would with a Goldman Sachs or with a law firm, or, you know, people who could, or a consulting firm or whatever, the CBI or anything. Because you can work flexibly in those contexts. So you have, what Carl has is a group of workers who have to be at the coalface. Then there's a group of workers who don't have to be at the coalface. And I think there should be conversations between the two of them. Because you know what? For people working from home, even though they want to work from home, there are downsides to that. Lack of social contact, right? Which they like. And yeah, they could go into the office. They will go into the office 1 day, 2 days a week. But there are also downsides for some men, for example, who are old-fashioned men who don't want these kids coming in when they're trying to have a telephone conversation, or like we're doing right now, having a thing. So I think, you know, having those conversations even between those two groups of workers is useful, because maybe the people at the coalface think that the other people, you know, are having it easy working from home. It's not that easy sometimes.
Yeah. Carl, just kind of finish as well, because we're running out of time now. Given, you know, the environment that you work in and the fact that you have got, you know, people that are working in very disparate roles, do you feel that the last 12 months have given you a new sense and a new perspective on how your workforce operates? And, you know, are there any kind of key things that you've learned from it that you definitely want to take forward in your new way of working?
I think one of the key things it's demonstrated is everybody on this call has had to adopt to something different. So we all have beliefs about this is how you do things, and it's always been done like this, and these are sacred cows that I can't change. And what COVID-19 has demonstrated is that, you know what, anything can change, and we should expect change every day. And if we don't, we're fooling ourselves. But secondly, the other thing is, sometimes you should just drive change, because you know what, you don't know where it'll take you, and be flexible. And I suppose one of the things I would sort of feel from where we've been, it is try and be more like a river or a stream where you can flow. And the three learnings I've had, you know, I've got a great chiropractor who bends me every which way he can. And the three things, you know, we talk about is be kind, be factual, and is it necessary? So again, I only speak if it's necessary, and it's just taking that view and the engagement of your people and consulting with, you know, everybody is absolutely key, because do you know what, the ideas what come, what you've not even dreamed of or thought of, is amazing, and it's a great journey, and sometimes it's like being on an roller coaster, just let go. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I think we could have carried on with this for much longer. It's been absolutely, you know, fascinating to hear the different insights. I've personally learned a lot from it, and your contributions have been absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for being on our panel today. And I'm sure that our audience, our supporters and members have found it incredibly useful as well. So I just want to thank you from everybody for giving up your valuable time today, and look forward to the next session. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point to speak again. It's been brilliant. And thanks everybody for listening in this afternoon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You got the cup in.
No, it's Man City on Saturday. Thank you. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you all. It's been fantastic.
Thanks
Thank
Carol.
you.
Good job. Great
Thank
job,
you.
Carol.